Hello, and welcome to this session, which will be an overview of the English Language Arts reading exams that you will be taking as part of your certification tests. I am Dr. Rodriguez. I will be sharing these details with you. You will have access to this PowerPoint as well as this video, so you can continue reviewing and access the links that are included here as well. You see my email there so that you are able to contact me with any questions you have. Of course, I have many of you in class or will be having you in class, which is another time that we will be going over this content and reviewing the material that you need to know for these exams. So let's go ahead and get started. So to begin with, you are doing an awesome job just by listening to this recording today. You have already set your goals and understand what the expectations are with regards to the certification exams. And so you might be at a different point in any one of these steps here, but really knowing that you have to have that goal of what you're going to accomplish, and then you have to have a plan in order to reach that goal. And so possibly you're somewhere a little further along that you've already made your plan and this is part of your plan. And now you're just working to reach your goal, which is ultimately being successful on these exams. So it's just something to think about here at the beginning. No matter where you are, take a minute to consider, what is my plan? What am I thinking about when it comes to getting these certifications done? And that is the end result. And then I have to back up and begin with understanding what the test includes, taking those practice tests and going on from there. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, and hopefully helping you to make that plan or to refine your plan if that's where you're at. So right now you have all made this decision that you're going to try. That's the first step. And the next step is going to be working on it and accomplishing these goals. So I'm excited to help you do that and look forward to celebrating with all of you as you complete these exams, get these certifications out of the way, and you are ready to move forward with graduating and being a classroom teacher. So in this session today, like I've said, we're just going to be doing some overview kind of things and then getting into some specific ways of studying with some examples on how to do that. So we'll be going through several different things and wrapping up at the end. And of course, we won't have a Q&A, but you will have the opportunity to email or be in touch with me with any follow-up questions that you have as you after you view the session. So like I said, I'm really trying to overview each of the ELAR portions of the different exams that you might be taking. So you might be an EC through 6 student or a 4 through 8 student. So depending on what your certification area is where you will focus right now looking at these competencies. And no matter which area you are between EC through 6 or 4 through 8, everyone will be completing the Science of Teaching Reading exam. So you're all to note the competencies here. So you see several things laid out here, these competencies that are just basically telling you this is what all is included within this competency, and within each competency, there are several descriptive statements that give you more details about what's included within that area. So one thing to note, and that is helpful to look at as you're looking across these different exams that you will be taking, is that there is crossover. What is helping you as you're studying for one of the exams will also be helping you as you were studying for the other one. And so that is almost a relief to understand that the content does carry over with some noted differences. And those are some things that we'll be talking about as we move forward and as you think about how you're going to move forward with your studying. So, not to get into reading each one of these competencies because you will have access to those to be able to look at more closely, but just taking a few minutes to review through these, and you very quickly start to see the overlap. 4 through 8 begins with the understanding of foundations of reading and reading skills. And those are the same things that the science of teaching reading begins with. The EC through 6 exam goes right into the content that you're expected to know. So it's not going to ask you foundational things because that will be found within what you're expected to know within the science of teaching reading. But then you start seeing the overlap as it gets into the literacy areas, seeing that oral language is covered, that word analysis is covered, and so on. A lot of carryover between the different vocabulary development, and here it is in 4 through 8. So we are understanding that this content, what we're learning, what we're doing in class, is helping us in multiple ways across these exams. We'll look closer at these competencies, and you will be studying them very closely as you prepare for your exams. One resource that I have available to you that I've put together, again, just to look a little more closely at these competencies, is this notion of what is the topic that is being covered and where do I find the information on it across the exams. And so this link is going to take you to the full document that goes through each of the topics covered and where they are covered in the exams. And you really get to see up close the overlap among the content as well as the difference. And so that's another study tool for you and another way of thinking about the content across the different exams. So generally, general information here when it comes to the test that you'll be taking. Hopefully this is not new information to you. With our focus on the ELAR part, if you are taking the EC through 6 exam, exam number 391, then we need to know that the ELAR part represents 21.5% of that exam. And it is, you have an hour and 10 minutes to complete that. So you can go through and see how this works across the different content areas, and then seeing how these questions, the number of questions that you should expect to see within each of those. And so within an hour and 10 minutes, you have 45 questions in ELAR to complete. And that's about the same across each of the content areas, sometimes with a little less time. So obviously this ELAR represents a large portion of this exam and makes it even more critical. You do need to pass each part of the exam. So either way, you are needing to be successful within this 21.5%. When you're on the 4 through 8 exam, for those of you that are in that certification area, you have 5 hours to complete that exam. And that now includes 90 multiple choice questions and 1 constructed response question. So you have a written question to respond to. You have a question to respond to in written form, both on this exam and on the Science of Teaching Reading exam. Okay, so those are things that we need to be aware of at this front end, kind of what am I preparing for and what do I expect to have as far as opportunities with time, number of questions, and what all am I expected to do when I'm taking that exam. So now jumping on through the agenda, you know, I've always mentioned when I'm doing these overviews or test prep sessions that it's difficult for me because studying is so personal in the way that you find that works best for you. It's an individual kind of process. And so with that in mind, the purpose, like I keep saying, of this session is to provide some overview and some tips, and then some specific ways of looking at our content. But it really is for you then to take that information and use it to work for you. So whatever you do with everything that I'm providing for you today, including a lot of resources that you'll have access to, is going to be for you to determine the best way to divide it up, what you begin with, where you focus, And so that is all part of what you are putting into your study plan for accomplishing your goals that you have. So it is individual. It's not for me to say the best way. I can give suggestions, but you need to figure out your time schedule and what will work best when it comes to planning your sessions, your study sessions. And so now I have, again, like I'm saying, here's a few suggestions, a few resources, a good place to start, in my opinion, because it's always about what things can I pull together that are going to help me study in the most effective way. And again, effective might be different for each of us. If you have been in my course, in my EDRE 4850 course, then you probably were asked to create an ELAR STR test prep binder. So you might have already completed this step. If not, this is a suggestion for getting started. This helps you to see what are all of the competencies that I need to know, and these are the ones that we'll be looking at more closely, and these links will take you to the documents that have the competencies. Everything is pretty much in the way that you think about a binder with dividers in between. And so make a divider for each of these areas, go to these links and print out the documents that are there. And that's your first step. Now I have something that is tangible that I can carry around with me that will be the first step of preparing for these exams. I probably would have a highlighter in there as well. I suggest additional paper, a pen, because that's something where you're taking notes, you're reviewing, you're circling things that you need to look at more closely, you're checking things off as you understand them. And it is a very active, live, ongoing resource for you, because you can constantly be referring to it and adding in whatever else is helpful to you when it comes to studying. Some people do make this test prep binder to include all the content areas, and so you could see where everything would be placed into one place where you're able to access it easily. That again is up to you on how you make it work. The next step, I hope you're aware and you have heard about taking your practice tests. Go ahead and jump in and try them. Where are you right now? How are you doing right at the beginning here as you're starting out? And all that does is give you a starting point, understanding that everybody's starting point is a little bit different. So you get access to those practice tests on Canvas. You go ahead and try them, and then you look at your test results. Do a little analysis. Where was I strong? Where was I a little weaker? And now what am I going to do to move forward with that information? What's going to work best for me? What can my peers help me with? How can I support my peers? All of these things are things that we want to talk about and figure out, so that when we talk about what is your plan, it's not just, well, I hope I can pass. It's here's where I'm at and here's what I'm doing. And so following these suggestions is giving you a step-by-step way of getting through this. And some of you might say, well, I see my test results, but I don't really know what they mean. So when it comes to the ELAR results, talk to me. That's when you email me and say, can you please help me study my test results? I did your first step 1 and 2. I have my binder. I've taken my test, but now I need help with step 3. And I will schedule a time. We will make an either in-person or a virtual meeting, and we will make an individualized plan for you. And I will be very excited to hear from you, asking me to help with that, and more excited to sit down and get that plan going, and then to check in with you regularly to see where you are. Okay, so now we have all of our plans in place. We have our resources. We know what we need to study. And just like I said at the very beginning, I want to provide an example of what that will look like. How do I study? What do I look at when it comes to these resources? As you saw in competency number 1, both in ELAR 4 through 8 and the science of teaching reading, It is all revolving around foundational knowledge and literacy. And so that's basically saying what is the groundwork, what is the foundation of that we need to understand to move forward with teaching reading and writing. So that's telling us we better have some background knowledge that we can pull from when I'm sitting down next to a student to talk to them about books and writing. So this is an example of one way to approach those competencies, that domain, and start thinking about what are those foundational skills and what do I need to know about them. So what you're seeing here is a visual that many of you have probably seen before because I use it often as showing you an example of the different literacy areas that we study and that we need to be very familiar with, both as teachers and for the content in these exams. So an example, a suggestion is to look at the competency that you need to know and start thinking about, okay, what is a visual that helps me to start looking at this area and start helping me to think about what needs to be included there. So when we're thinking about foundational knowledge and using this visual, you can see where each of the literacy areas are included and thinking about them in the analogy of a hot air balloon, understanding that oral language is so critical that I'm using it as the fire that makes the balloon get up off the ground. Without oral language, it is impossible for us to move forward as teachers with teaching them about sounds and rhyming and syllables, much less letters and vocabulary. Okay, so it all revolves around what are we doing very, very early on to develop that oral language. And that is why, as you look at the competencies, it is one of the first in each of the areas, because that's the beginning point. And then you see how everything builds from there. So the basket, or what we might stand on, our foundation of as readers and writers, is our phonological awareness. All of these things that we start doing very young as we're playing, as we're talking and singing songs that are rhyming, we're looking at pictures, we're clapping out the sounds and words. All of that is phonological awareness. Phonological awareness gets a little more detailed at the phonemic awareness stage, where they have to start thinking about each individual sound in the word rather than the word parts or what rhymes with the words. And the key piece to all of this is that this is oral activities, oral knowledge that we're taking on before we begin with the phonics, the literacy component that then brings in the letters and the letter sound correspondence. Each of these areas have so many things that we gather information about that we need to understand. And so that is where you then kind of take each one of them apart. And that's what happens in each of the competencies that follow for all of the exams. So we consider these areas here at the bottom of the hot air balloon to be the foundational pieces to know, of course, the oral language, have that developed, along with knowing how words work with sounds and letters, and now pulling it all together for how we develop vocabulary, comprehension, and fluency as readers. And each one of these pieces require assessments to know how students are doing. It requires instruction and some type of evaluation to keep on to know that our instruction is right where it needs to be. So I just gave you an example of what to think about for how to kind of approach each of the competency. You're going to look at it in a second. We're going to look at one and the descriptive statement for an example. If it's appropriate, check out the TEKS for that competency. For example, on the TEK on vocabulary development, go in the competency about vocabulary development, go into the TEKS and look at what the instruction says for first grade for vocabulary development, for second, for third, and how it shifts across the grade levels. That's part of what needs to be understood for each competency. Looking at the competency, you're highlighting keywords. If you don't know what they are, look in the glossary that's in your binder. You printed it out, it's one of the sections, and define them. And if it's not there, add in the definition. It might already be there. And then you're ready to get into studying. Here's everything that I'm not sure about. Here's what I know about this competency. Here's what I don't know. And so go ahead and make a visual of your own, just like the one you just saw as an example, and really start brainstorming through. And here are some questions that, just to help you get going. And as you look at some of these questions, you're going to see this pattern that emerges across each of the competencies and their descriptive statements. It starts becoming very clear. Okay, for each area that they're asking me to know about, I need to know what that area is, what those vocabulary terms mean, and then how do I assess students for that? How does it change over the grade levels? What would I expect to see in terms of development for students? And of course, how do I think about this area when it comes to diverse learners? For my students that need to be challenged, for my students that are English learners, or for those that are struggling, what am I going to do differently? And having this knowledge for each of the competencies in the exam, you will be well on your way to being prepared, because these are the things that you're expected to know for each of those areas. So having these questions printed out, and when I say meet with friends, talk about it with peers, here's what you can talk about. Let's talk about oral language, guys. What is it? What does it look like in third grade? What does an activity look like for English language learners, oral language development? That's the kind of conversations you can have with one another. And if you can't answer those questions, then that's where you need to jump into our resources to study. And here are the resources. The TEKS that I just mentioned, you can print them out right here, put them in your binder. And that way, when you're looking at those competencies, you can have them right at your fingertips to say which TEKS align here. These are, I believe these are the same links from that you have in your binder already, just provided again here. This gives you the full prep manual that also has sample questions, several other resources included. So that's a great thing to have at your fingertips. This glossary is in addition to the one that you have as well. Lots of things to print out or to save on your computer, but make sure and do that, because you don't know which part is going to be the most helpful for you. And so doing this review and really seeing, again, what is going to work for you, it's me just providing the resources and you determining what you're going to do with them. And so now an example, just like I said at the beginning, I was going to end with kind of a demonstration of how you do a little studying. So in the EC through 6 exam, the first competency is all about oral language. And so as an example of how you would look at that competency and begin to study it, this is the actual competency, and these are the descriptive statements that are included with it. And so to begin with, you're very much reading it and seeing, out of all of these statements and these statements that I'm expected to know as a beginning teacher, what do I already know? What makes sense here? And if it makes sense, maybe even at what level am I, like a 10 when it comes to knowledge here? Maybe I know some of this, but not all of it. All of these things to consider. And so that's what again, and now we're looking at the competencies, and what's the first step is to just read them and see where you are in your understandings. So an example, I've printed it out, made it bigger here. I'm looking at it. And as I look at this statement, I might say, here are some of the things here that kind of stand out for me that I couldn't really describe if I was asked. I can't really define oral language. So that's something I'm highlighting to tell me I need to look at it more closely. Developmental processes of oral language, basically the stages of development. If that's not something familiar to you, then that's another place that you're looking into your glossary. You include it in your glossary if it's not there. As you continue reading through this statement, you might say, varied opportunities. Do I know what opportunities I could provide as a teacher to develop listening and speaking skills? If not, I'm highlighting that. That's the part where it comes into instruction. Do I know how to instruct in this area appropriately and effectively? And so then you start going through each one. You see, this is tedious. But the point is that you will not have to do this with each competency once you really see where your strengths and weaknesses are. So again, the first step being taking the practice test to know where you hone in, which competency, reading through this descriptive statement, and thinking through perhaps there's several pieces here. In my example, I'm showing you some highlighting that you might say, I don't know what these terms are. I don't know what the stages in the acquisition of oral language is. I don't know phonology. I want to study a little more about semantics, but I've heard that term before. And so these are giving you places to start delving in and to start looking for resources to help you learn about them. So you've read the descriptive statement, you've done some highlighting, and it becomes, how do I study it? This is where you start looking at, well, let's see what Dr. Rodriguez has for me when it comes to competency one and resources. If I don't understand about this, what can I do? Oh, okay. She has a visual here. I could make my own visual that looks very closely at oral language. This can be a little overwhelming. I know when you look at it for the first time, thinking about all these components. But after you really start aligning this with study and the work that we're going to be doing in class together, or that you have been doing in class, it becomes, okay, I see it's pretty much laid out here. When I'm thinking about this oral language competency, this literacy component, here's how it is defined. Here's the big areas that are included in it. And then here's more specific details within each of those big areas. And we'll talk more about this either in class together or in separate study sessions. But the idea is to look at this and think about how this tree represents all the different areas that are included in this one competency area. You could basically make a tree or something similar for all of the competency areas, for phonological awareness, for vocabulary, looking at it in the same way. So again, an example, and then here's the link, guys, to this picture. You can print it out, put it in your binder. You look at it, the more you look at it, the more it really starts making sense and aligning with what you need to understand as a teacher and for the exam in the area of oral language. And then check out the practice questions that I have provided for you for each of the competency areas. Here's a few examples. You could pause for a minute and write and get the answers to each of these questions. This is an example of some practice questions that I have included in the resource folder that you will have the link to at the end of this session. So you've made a visual of the competencies and the descriptive statements. You kind of talked through it and thought about those different areas. And now delve in and try some practice questions and see how you're doing. So just an example of what these might look like. These are practice test questions that align with competency 1 and EC through 6 and the STR competency 3. And so you might have decided to work through those right now. You could go to the link here where the answers are provided. And if you go through and you say, I'm not sure why I got that or why I didn't get that one, Those are the kinds of questions I want to hear from you. You do your own individual or peer studying and gather questions and say, the three of us want to talk to you about some things that none of us could answer. These are the kinds of things that's the kind of studying I want to help you with. That the very specific to what you have found that you needed after you have put in some time doing some work on it. It's not for me to say, okay, come to this session and I'm providing everything you need to know. No, it's you come to the session and I'm ready to support you with where you are and what questions you have. Okay. And so here is the link to the study resources. I'm going to go ahead and push it so I can show you what I pulled together here. This will be our folder where what you will see is each of the competencies, the different competencies included. And within each of the competencies, for example, oral language, there might be a study guide, there's quiz questions and answers. And there's also just looking at the competencies, here's the way they kind of break it up, or it's been broken up, where I've pulled together different resources into one folder. So you might have already seen some of these. Some of these might be new to you, but the idea is that it's all consolidated in this one area, and you can focus in on the folder that on the competency where you need to, and really take it from there. And I also have different games to play just to help you in a fun way think about this content. The links here to what was provided in the PowerPoint are all here. So this is the real, gold mine of resources. But like I keep saying, it is only helpful to you if you are using it in the way that you're making it work for you. You've learned what's easier and what's harder, and you focus on those areas. And lastly, here's a link to a Kahoot game. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. It will take you to Kahoot. You put in this PIN number and just practice. There's about 50 questions there. See how you do with these ELAR overview kind of general questions that you can expect to see on the exam. And that's just another way for you to work through it, maybe do it with a friend and talk through your results. You got this, guys. We've all got this. We're going to get through these exams and get everything together for you before your due dates, before your applications are due. And then you can move forward focusing on finishing your program, learning all the things that you want to know as a teacher, and being ready to be hired as soon as the administrators at your school see how awesome that you are. So this session was, again, an overview. Go through, do these steps, and then come talk to me. Tell me how you're doing, what else you need, and where we can go from here to determine how best to help you. Get these resources together and let's see how you're doing. Okay, so thank you for listening, and definitely be in contact with me. You have my email. My office is Building 1, 201L. And, always just reach out, and I'm happy to help you get through this and make your goals, get your goals accomplished way ahead of the due dates that are laid out for you. Okay, have a great rest of your week, and thank you for listening.